Well, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Steve Polanski. I'm with FINRA. I'm here with my colleague, Pete Chandler, and our third colleague, Gary Matola, who worked on this paper as actually at his son's graduation right now. So we're here talking about retirement, and he's there with his son, who's sort of at the optimal point to start planning for retirement from everything we've learned with, compound interest and save. And that may outweigh a lot of the nuances of asset allocation and so forth. So the comments we're making today are really on our own behalf, not FINRA's behalf. And we're really looking at this subject more from a functional perspective, what a robo-advisor targeted at the decumulation stage would need to do. And we're not trying to analyze that from a legal perspective and FINRA rules or IA rules, but just really what it would need to do. So this paper grew out of some work that we did previously on digital investment advice. It's a report FINRA put out back in 2016 that looked both at robo-advisors, but also the tools that advisors themselves were using. And really, in my view at least, what robo-advisors did in many cases very nicely is take tools that financial advisors could use and had available to them, and they packaged them in a way that made those tools easier to use, sometimes with the loss of flexibility and maybe using less information, but they made them easy to use and gave them to the consumer directly. So in that paper we talked about algorithm governance and portfolio governance and a variety of other things, which we're not going to talk about here. But we did think it would be interesting when Olivia approached us to try and figure out, well, how could these tools be used once you get to retirement, sort of at the end of the process, or I don't want to say the beginning of the end of the process because that sounds a little bit morbid, but going into retirement. So let me just move ahead here. So we spent some time talking to a number of different robo-advisors and individuals and entities that are working in this general area, and to try and understand what these tools would need to do. So let me turn it over to Pete now. Whoops.
Thanks. So I come at it really from a Thank you. I come at this from an investor education perspective. I work in FINRA's Office of Investor Education and see firsthand, often through phone calls and through our boots on the ground kind of understanding of investors, just how difficult the decumulation process is. We actually get probably more phone calls and more direct response from people as they're entering retirement or as they have a very, direct touch point with a retirement or a investment goal or real need, whether it's their first year with an RMD or it's the first year out of retirement, and they really have many, many questions at that point. It made it a very real project for us, thinking about what we would do in a robo space that isn't already done in an advisory space for people who are really facing this critical, say, 20 or 30 years of their life. So the goal in decumulation, as all of you know, is not to continue to save more. That's already done. And the people that we spoke with really were people who were already experts in providing products and also leaders in what I would say providing the business of services to advisory services. Robo-decumulation services are, if you will, a line extension of robo-accumulation and a line extension of the whole advice strategy. And like many line extensions, it's more difficult sometimes to do that second round than it is the first. What we really wanted to know was What if you've used robo in an accumulation phase, or more importantly, you've never used digital investment advice in the accumulation phase, and now you're looking for an inexpensive way, or maybe you've heard that it's inexpensive, or you have an understanding that this might really help you when you retire. Can digital advice providers meet this need? And so we went to those who were already providing this kind of information in some capacity. Some of those that we can name were United Income, Betterment, E-Trade, Schwab. We had others that we spoke with as well. And we also, and a number of you were in this room, and please speak up during the conversation later. We also spoke with what I would call financial educators and educational, had an educational or advocacy role to play, and asked them questions about whether or not they felt there were some concerns with the decumulation in the robo space generally.
I think if you keep that, I'll just... So, I think as we started to talk to people about this, what we realized, and Pete and his colleague probably knew this immediately, but it was a learning process for me, is that once you enter decumulation or start thinking about decumulation, you're really starting to address a number of very complex and challenging questions that are, I think, much more difficult in many respects than during the accumulation stage. So, you have questions about life expectancy, you have questions about your health, what's going to happen there, just knowing what you're going to do in retirement, how you're going to spend your time, and how that may change over time, as indeed your health may change over time. So there are a number of uncertainties that really, and complexities that you don't, for the most part, face on the investing side. And the decisions that you make when you do these may be sort of one-time decisions, or the decisions that are fairly difficult to unwind if you get them wrong. During the accumulation stage with the robo, you can change the amount you contribute each month. You can potentially readjust your portfolio or your risk tolerance to make your portfolio more aggressive or less aggressive, and those will certainly have an impact, but they're all undoable and adjustable. But once you start getting into the retirement stage, there are questions that you can't undo easily, and that you don't really have a learning curve for through the accumulation process. Some of the people we spoke with talked about their tools being for do-it-yourselfers, and in some cases those are really tools that are used more by firms where it's a self-directed account, but they provide folks with various types of tools that can help them make decisions. Robos that we spoke with when we did our study tended to be targeted more at passive investors. But for the do-it-yourselfer, there's a learning curve where you can make mistakes but still recover. But your learning curve for some of these retirement decisions is the decision itself, or perhaps robos that are serving this market can figure out ways to gamify these decisions so that maybe you can get a bit of practice as you head towards them, or do something so that you can educate yourself. The other thing I think that, while these decisions are challenging for investors, in many ways they're also challenging for the advisors themselves. And I think this is an area where the academic community can add a lot, because the robos, when we did our survey that we spoke with, all had copious white papers on modern portfolio theory explaining the basis for their investment methodologies. I was in business school. These looked disturbingly similar and equally riveting to the papers that I had to read at the time. Whether investors will understand them, is an open question, but there is a huge amount of literature that these firms put out there, especially in their initial stages, I think, to sort of establish their legitimacy and their credentials by drawing on academic literature. But they don't really have that when you get to decumulation. Or if it is, it's a much narrower field. So there's significant challenges there, and there are challenges in that, you need to look at a much broader set of information. The robos in the accumulation stage are basically, you're putting together some sort of investment plan. And if you're really going to effectively plan for retirement, you need a financial plan. And so you need a much broader set of data not only financial data, but potentially health data. I don't know if we want to get to DNA data, but certainly it plays in, and I should stop. Sorry.
Okay. So let me jump to some of the feedback directly. First of all, and maybe not surprisingly, we did learn from the folks we spoke to that the majority of robos that we spoke with were considering the industry at large as not particularly focused at this time on decumulation. It was sort of like, we have our plate completely full just with what we're doing now, and this was an undercurrent I think we felt with a lot of folks that we spoke with. They were busy. They were busy with the accumulation phase. They were busy with being the best advisor in that space with just the accumulation. And decumulation may come later, and we'll think about that down the road or as we are working in our current space. Some did offer, and some focused indeed on decumulation and saw that as their sweet spot. One firm, for example, offers an automatic withdrawal feature that investors can turn on or off. One of the comments that was made is that one of the things that robos are particularly good at is routine processes. So a standard withdrawal, making sure you take the same amount each month in retirement, is something that a robo could do very well. And the same with providing information on RMDs and others. These are sorts of things that they can provide in an environment that is perhaps less nerve-wracking for the client than if they had to do it themselves or even think about doing it. In the do-it-yourself space, we know that some did provide strong line of income-oriented portfolios. They expected their consumers to really dig into the details a little bit more. They did provide information, or we were assuming that they will be providing that information. And the one theme also that came out regularly was that there is this hybrid approach. Yes, we know that decumulation is more difficult, but we do need to provide a resource, personal resource as well.
So maybe I'll just skip ahead, I think. So I spoke too long, so I think we'll just skip ahead. Why don't we hear what you want to talk about?
Yeah, we did speak briefly with, we had a session with our investor advocates, and they did have some very interesting points to bring up about the robo environment. They were concerned, for example, and these are leaders in their field and people who really have the investors' best interests at heart. First of all, they believe that they have a democratization opportunity and a lower cost opportunity, but that's not a given. There are, for example, situations in which even an index fund can be quite expensive. The investor, probably understanding what these folks knew about the investor's financial literacy, knew that they probably aren't going to look at a lot of this information. So that's not a given. Also, the scale of failure could be quite large. If robos get it wrong, they get it wrong for a lot of people.
And then our 45-second sprint. Some of the takeaways that we had, as Pete said, we think there's a significant potential for these types of tools. There's a significant need for them. There's significant questions about how technology will advance. When we look at what the cost of these DNA sequencing went from and where it is now, it's hard to know what technology can offer folks in the future. I think ultimately you're looking at a business decision for the firms about what it costs to develop these capabilities and how much they bring, what their return is. And given advances in technology, it's hard to know what those costs will be. But clearly, based on where we are now, in the current state, I think there's a view that the hybrid model is something that we need to take, is the most likely vehicle for decumulation planning to go forward, with the potential possibly for more purely technology-based solutions with sort of a big question mark.